What's up, everybody? Ron Placone here, reporting for Status Coup. This video is not easy for me to make, but this is something that I've been a part of for most of this year, and it looks like the ending is very, very likely not going to be what we were hoping for. And I'm, of course, referring to the two antitrust bills, OMA and ACOA. These are two antitrust bills that we're going to start breaking up big tech, and we're huge for the future of the internet. Things aren't looking good this year, folks. That's just the sad truth of it. So let's start from the beginning for anyone who may not have been following this as intensely as I've been. What is antitrust? Well, antitrust are the protections that is supposed to be imposed by lawmakers, the protections against monopolies. Basically, it prevents monopolies in any given industry from happening. And what is a monopoly? It is a situation in which one entity controls pretty much all the commerce in any given area. To give a brief history from the United States standpoint, the last time we saw significant antitrust legislation in the United States was ironically enough involved AT&T, which is ironic because they're also among the big tech companies today. But back in the 1980s, AT&T had pretty much a monopoly on our phone lines. And long distance calling, AT&T pretty much ran the gamut there, and there was no competition. So what did that allow them to do? It allowed them to jack up the prices pretty intensely of long distance phone calls. If you're like me and you're an elder millennial or older, you remember those days when you would make a long distance call to maybe your family who lived in a different state, and your parents were standing there with a timer. And if you went longer than like 35 seconds, they hung up the freaking phone because you were paying like $40 a minute or whatever it used to be. Long distance phone calls cost an arm and a leg. And that was because AT&T had a monopoly on the phone lines. They also engaged in a lot of anti-competitive practices. They established a stronghold on all of the equipment for long distance calling, and they wouldn't allow any other companies to access that equipment. So basically, they prohibited any competition from potentially happening. So the law got involved, and they enforced some antitrust legislation against AT&T. And what happened after that? Well, long distance calling got a lot more affordable. The prices went down considerably. We got different inventions that we hadn't had prior, like the answering machine and the modem, which eventually led to the World Wide Web. Now, that wasn't the only thing that led to the World Wide Web. And of course, I believe the internet would have happened regardless. But this type of antitrust legislation helped basically craft the internet as we know it today. And that was antitrust legislation that came about during the Reagan administration. Reagan was no fan of antitrust, nor was he a fan of working people. But sometimes, if the public outcry is loud enough, you can get some good antitrust legislation, regardless of whatever ghouls are in charge. So, bringing us to current day, where's some of the antitrust that we needed now? Well, we need it in regards to our grocery chain, we need it in regards to our media, and we need it in regards to big tech, which brings me to these two bills. So, how do monopolistic practices happen in big tech? Well, it concerns a handful of companies, among them Amazon, Google, Apple. And what are some of the things that they do? Well, one of the things Amazon does, keep in mind, Amazon is the biggest online retailer out there. Over 50% of all e commerce goes through Amazon.com. In Amazon, what they'll do, one of the things they do that's very anti-competitive is they make generic versions of different products that they know people are looking for. It's the holidays, so let's use a holiday-esque example. Let's say you're looking for a certain vibrator because it's the best vibrator out there, and it's a custom-made vibrator that you really want to buy. Well, Amazon is harvesting everyone's data, so they know that a bunch of people like this vibrator. Then they decide to make a generic version of said vibrator. Maybe they're going to call it the Bezos Blaster, whatever. You go to search for said vibrator and you're using Amazon because, again, it's one of the big juggernaut online retailers out there. Well, Amazon manipulates those search results and they show you all of their generic products, in this case, the Bezos Blaster vibrator, and not the actual vibrator you're looking for. They do this for countless products and services. So the actual vendors get screwed and Amazon makes another sale. One of the things that Google does, they engage in a process called scraping. Data scraping. Say that 5 times fast. What that is, let's say you're searching for information on horses. Maybe you want to go horseback riding, whatever. And there's a website out there. They got some great information on horses. Then maybe they have some vendors who advertise horse riding classes or something like that. And that's how they run their business. What Google will do is they will scrape the data from that website. They'll take their information, they'll repackage it as their own. And then when you do a Google search on horses, instead of that website coming up, well, Google's repackaged data will show up. So Google will be getting all the web traffic and clicks and not the actual website. This pretty much allows them to have a stranglehold on the internet. And a bill called ACOA stops them from engaging in those practices. ACOA says, look, you can't do that. You have to just have search results, just be honest and open and a level playing field. Over in the application world, Apple has a near monopoly on how applications work because on Apple devices, they have a pretty much a dictatorship on what software will and won't work on your device. And they charge exorbitant fees for any third-party apps to be on their platform. The commission fees are so high, a lot of alternative and independent apps can't afford them. A bill called OMA, which is the second antitrust bill floating around here, OMA breaks that up. It says, hey, you can't do that. It ends the high commission fees, it levels the playing field in the App Store, and it allows the user to decide which software will or won't work on their device. So these are some significant pieces of antitrust legislation that goes a long way in breaking up big tech. And we have been fighting for these bills for the better part of a year. Chuck Schumer promised to vote. Chuck Schumer didn't bring it up for a vote. Why? Well, because Chuck Schumer has a ton of conflicts of interest when it comes to big tech. His daughter works for Amazon, and she's a lobbyist. His other daughter works for Meta, which, of course, is the company that includes Facebook. And they have been lobbying and spending millions of dollars to crush these bills. Literally millions of dollars they've spent to crush these bills. And Chuck Schumer kept kicking it down the road and kicking it down the road and kicking it down the road. Now, Chuck Schumer wasn't the lone villain here. Of course, you had big tech lobbying. You had Republicans and Democrats who take big tech money, so they're not pushing on this. And of course, you had an indifferent Joe Biden in his Rip Van Winkle-like status, not really giving a hoot about any of this because he's also in bed with Comcast, again, another company who's not a big fan of these bills. So this brings us to present. Now, our last big Hail Mary to get this vote in during the lame duck and before the new Congress takes over was to push it through in the omnibus bill. Now, the omnibus bill is another one of those must-pass pieces of legislation to avoid a government shutdown. And we were hoping that OMA and ACOA would be attached to the omnibus bill and it would pass that way. That didn't happen. So here's an update from Fight for the Future. Colin, if you could pull that up. Big tech narrowly avoids regulation in the U.S., but their days are numbered. U.S. Congress has finally released the text of the omnibus spending package, likely the last piece of legislation to move this year. And this is from Evan Greer, policy director at Fight for the Future. The good news is that this package does not include the dangerous COSA bill, which is a misguided piece of legislation that would have created an end run around Section 230 and led to censorship of LGBTQ plus and abortion rights content. The bad news, the terrible news, we'll get straight to the terrible news here. So we stopped this one bad bill, which is good, but here's the terrible news. Congress failed to advance actual tech reform bills, including ACOA, which is the American Innovation and Choice Online Act, and the Open Apps Market Act, which is OMA. Common sense antitrust legislation that would have banned big tech giants from abusing their gatekeeper power to crush competition, paving the way for alternative services with better business models or nonprofit governance structures. So, big tech giants spent more than $200 million in lobbying. But big tech lobbyists should keep the champagne corked. They just lit a ton of money on fire, and they basically barely squeaked by with a win. And here's the end here. Big tech big tech's days are numbered. Once they've outlawed their gatekeeper abuses and banned the commercial surveillance that drives their profit and monopoly power, their empires will begin to crumble. And in the meantime, we'll continue building the internet we want and need, one where everyone has basic rights, freedom of expression, privacy, and safety. So we're basically getting it in the omnibus bill. That was a holiday miracle. We're now past the holiday miracle. We're hoping for whatever is a little bit beyond a holiday miracle. Now, is there a chance that a crazy Hail Mary is going to get caught in the end zone? Technically, yes. And I encourage everyone, if you haven't already, go to bidenpromised.us. That's bidenpromised.us. And sign the petition to demand action on the antitrust legislation before the lame duck is over. We basically have until the end of this week. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. The omnibus bill was basically our last freaking chance. But technically, a crazy miracle could happen before the buzzer. And if there's one more shot, you got to take it. But it's not looking good, folks. And by the end of this week, we will know definitively whether or not this is going to go down as a win or a loss. And it's not looking good. And again, this is a tough pill to swallow because I was part of this campaign for the better part of this year, literally since about April. But here's another piece of good news that's a little bit hopeful. This campaign and the demand for this type of legislation got a lot of attention, not just here in the United States, but around the world. If we can pull up the New York Times piece here. Amazon agrees to change some business practices in EU settlement. Amazon, this is from the New York Times. Amazon has agreed to a settlement with European Union regulators that will force the company to make significant changes to its business practices, but also allows the e-commerce giant to avoid a drawn-out legal fight and billions of dollars to potential fines. The settlement, expected to be announced on December 20th, will end 2 antitrust investigations in Europe. The deal will require Amazon to give makers of rival products equal access to valuable real estate on its website. That's exactly the type of practices that we were talking about, where they favor their generic products over everybody else. So this is a deal that the EU made Amazon make here. So the deal represents a sign of progress for European regulators. So what this is telling us in the big scheme of things, now, let's not make this out to be bigger than it is. Amazon's not facing any consequences for their monopolistic behavior. But what this is telling us is that the world is paying attention. The world is much more aware of this than they once were. And we are gonna be able to fight another day. In the meantime, let's keep fighting until the buzzer rings. And technically, it hasn't rang quite yet. So please go to bidenpromise.us, make your voice heard. We got to throw everything at the kitchen sink. It is probably over, but technically not quite completely, definitively over quite yet. We have until the end of this week. So let's go down swinging. And no matter what happens, the fight's going to continue in 2023. And folks, in brighter news also as well, I'm going to be on the road in 2023. Come check out a live show. I kick things off in San Diego, California, January 7th. That's a free show, San Diego. So come on out, but reservations are recommended. So go to my website, ronplacone.com, for info on that. January 28th, Tucson, Arizona. That is a stand-up show and the premiere screening of my short film, Loner. Use the promo code Lucy at checkout for discounted tickets. That's a holiday special, so don't wait, Tucson. Get them now. And February 10th, April 14th, and May 12th, I'm doing shows at the Glendale Room in Los Angeles, California. Those are our solo shows, working on my hour for 2023. And American Midwest and the UK, hold tight. I'm going to have some announcements for you soon. Go to ronplacone.com for all tickets and information. And this is Ron Placone for Status Coup, signing out.